Hello, everyone. I see the red light blinking on the screen, so it looks like we're live at the launch event of the Climate Alarm Clock podcast and movement. Maybe that's what it'll be after a while. My name is Colm O Regan, and I was delighted to be invited to help launch this, and I'm really delighted that it's starting. We'll be throughout the next, hopefully under an hour, we'll be hearing about the podcast, why it started, why it's needed. We'll be hearing little snippets, teasers, clips from the podcast, and also talking to some of the people involved and finding out why they're doing what they're doing and why it's necessary. We can already see that we need more level-headed discussion and information on this because it is quite a bun fight out there in 10-minute segments on the radio where there is an expert brought in to explain why something is going on, and then somebody who just says they don't believe in anything is brought on as the counterweight, and then we do a vox pop with one person who says, I don't know. So this is an opportunity for, I think, everybody to find out in an entertaining, interesting way what's going on, what we can do, and who are the other people that are working in this area, because it's really important, especially for people who are going, what do I do? Where do I start? To know who else is out there. So I'm glad to find that out. And we're finding that out through the Climate Alarm Clock podcast. So a few nuts and bolts about this evening and what we're doing. So as I say, we will be getting sneak previews. We will be talking to the people involved. And also, we'll have a Q&A at the end, right? So if you could submit any questions or just general encouragement, even a hup you buy you, go on away, fair play, any of those things will also be taken as comment or question currency. But if you want to submit questions via the chat about the podcast, maybe suggestions and anything like that, please do. You can do it through the YouTube. If you're on, give me a shout if you're on YouTube, give me a shout the Facebook people, give me a shout the Twitter people, and they'll all come up here in the comments here. So please do that. And also please follow on the socials. So Instagram or Facebook, it's at Climate Alarm Clock. And then on Twitter, it's the Climate Alarm. Probably some who are squatting on Climate Alarm Clock Twitter account. I hate that. You log in, you're looking for a Twitter account, and they have one tweet in 2011, and they're sitting on the account that you want. But we've got a brilliant account, that Climate Alarm on Twitter. Details about the podcast. So it's launching on Friday, and it's available on Spotify, Amazon, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. There'll be 8 episodes in this series, released every Friday for the rest of October and November. So it's going to be one of those podcasts that is not going to make you feel guilty about a backlog. You know, the way we've got about a million hours. This is what's manageable. So this is a podcast to listen to when you realize that you've got 1,000 hours of another podcast to listen to and it's making you feel bad. Clear this one out of the way. It's manageable, and that's very important. Each episode of the Climate Alarm Clock is going to begin with a roundup of the week's climate news, as well as an event guide. I presume the event guide isn't like, details of climate catastrophes that are upcoming in the next week. I think it'll be climate discussion related events. So check out those. There'll be features, interviews, climate explainers, and we do need explainers. And it won't be splaining. It'll be non-patronizing, easy to digest, but still challenging explainers on some of the key topics that we hear just flitting around in the media. Stuff that makes us feel bad that we don't know more about. This is the place to come to find out about that. So in the first episode, we'll hear about the Citizens' Assembly on climate change. And now our tech legend, Robert, is going to line up that clip. So he's going to be playing a clip very soon. While we're doing that, let me just check, see who's logged in. We said hello. We got 18 for 0. Fair play. That's exactly what we're looking for. Hello from Facebook. Hi, Kira. Hi, Joe OM. Hi, Brian Byrne, bringing a yup. Yup has entered the chat. Thanks, Dennis and Elaine O'Dwyer, Garrison, and Robert, KTH. Great stuff. Nice to see people in the chat. Keep it up if there's any more. Let people know on Twitter or Facebook that you're in this thing. And as I say, you'll be out in time for is Bake Off on now? I don't know. I can't remember what time of the week it's on. But first up, let us hear about the Citizens' Assembly on climate change. And that's going to be one of the clips that will be in the first episode. So, Robert, let's take it away. Give me a shout if it's not playing, if you can't hear it.
We're going to start our climate policy feature with an interesting bunch of people. Well, of this group, 80% said they would be willing to pay higher taxes on carbon-intensive activities. 89% were in favour of a tax on greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, and 93% were in favour of greatly increasing the number of bus lanes, cycle lanes, and park and ride facilities that we have. You might be expecting these radical recommendations to come from a climate activist group like Extinction Rebellion. But actually, these are the recommendations of a group of 99 randomly selected Irish citizens who formed the Citizens' Assembly. The Assembly was formed in 2016 and brought Irish citizens together to discuss and make recommendations on important legal and policy issues. The Assembly worked under principles like openness, fairness, equality of voice and respect. In addition to climate change, the Citizens' Assembly deliberated on the 8th Amendment, recommending that it be repealed, which it subsequently was in a referendum. The Assembly members were average Irish citizens, just like you or me. They are randomly selected from the electoral register and invited to participate in the Assembly over 7 weekends between 2016 and 2018. The 99 members were representative of Irish society in terms of age, gender, social class, and regional spread. The Assembly spent 2 whole weekends deliberating on climate change. Members listened to expert presentations. They asked questions. They had discussions on topics like energy, transport, and agriculture. They also considered over 1,000 public submissions. Based on that work, the Assembly made 13 recommendations on climate change. In addition to the ones mentioned earlier, 97% recommended ensuring climate change is at the centre of policy making in Ireland, and 100% recommended that the state take a leadership role in addressing climate change. The Citizen Assembly demonstrates that when the public are given an opportunity to learn about and discuss climate change, they support the radical change needed to avoid environmental catastrophe. Since Ireland held our Assembly on climate, a number of countries, including France, Canada, Spain, Germany, and the UK, have followed suit. This is such a great source of hope. In Ireland, the Assembly's recommendations influenced the government's Climate Action Plan. But the Climate Action Plan didn't take on board all the important recommendations. Because of that, there is still more to be done. The Climate Action Plan will be updated soon, so now is a good time to keep the pressure on our politicians. We need to push them to make their climate action promises become climate action realities. If you would like to see all the Assembly's recommendations implemented in the new Climate Action Plan, we encourage you to email your local TDs. Ask them if they support the recommendations and what steps they will take to see them implemented. We think it's time for the state to take that leadership role that was endorsed by 100% of citizens in the Assembly.
That was Rachel, one of the voices of the podcast, Rachel Lockery. And so that, again, what I like about that clip is it sneaks up on you. It surprises you by telling us that actually a lot of this stuff is normalized. We are thinking this. We are practicing this. It's just that sometimes the message is that there's a war out there, when in fact, ordinary people are plugging away at the very necessary minutia and detail that is required, because everything big has to come down to small, sometimes small discussions and paragraphs in and sentences discussed in Citizens' Assembly. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce the host of the Climate Alarm Clock podcast, and he's waiting in the wings there. It's Dara Wynne. Dara, welcome to your show.
Thanks very much, Colm. Thanks a million. Thanks a million for being here today, for launching it for us.
You're excited and tense and nervous. Just why did you start it, or why are you all? What was there a tipping point that said, right, we need to do something?
So I suppose the Citizens' Assembly is a really good starting point for us, Colm, to start talking about that, because actually the Citizens' Assembly it's such a source of hope, because it shows you that when people are given the information, when they are given a chance to hear from experts and to hear how bad things are, they really, really want the radical action that we need. So actually, one of the biggest problems that we're facing with climate change is that we don't have the information out there. And that's kind of where we're coming from with this, is that we're going to be a one-stop shop for climate information for people, so that every week they can tune into the podcast, they'll hear some bad news, probably with climate stuff, they'll hear events that are going on, as you've said. So I suppose where the idea came from is that a few months ago, I created a podcast called the COVID Alarm Clock with Rob, our sound engineer, and Ellen Hegarty. And over 7 episodes, we were looking at the parallels between the COVID crisis and the climate crisis, and looking to see, could we learn some lessons? Could we use COVID as a wake-up call to take real climate action? And as we discussed the media, we kind of noticed that the COVID coverage was just unavoidable. It was in your face. No matter where you looked, there was COVID coverage there. And actually, if you want climate change news, you still have to go out and look for it. You still have to go onto the internet, look for it. And I think it takes a strange kind of commitment to do that, to intentionally go out of your way to find that bad news. So we said we'd make that a bit easier with this podcast.
It was interesting with the COVID coverage that there wasn't a fear of going into the science of it. There was no effort to dumb down or create, well, I mean, there are obviously exceptions. There was lots of debate, but the notion that here is a virus, it exists, and it's bad for you, that was taken as a baseline. And then everything after that is maybe policy, nuance, emphasis, personality clashes, different backgrounds, not, empathy, but there was a basis of, this is some heavy shit. Whereas we're still sometimes, I know that you talk to any climate related person and say we stopped debating, but yes, the media still is dicking around with the baseline.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we're definitely going to try to do. Like any time that you hear climate coverage, it often mentions the inconvenience that people are going to face, like climate action, which is totally grand. But if you're losing sight of the fact that we're in a climate emergency and that we need to take action, then you're not getting the full picture. You're not getting, as you said, the baseline like you had with COVID.
Yeah. And one of the things is, it also is possibly, and this is slight pie in the sky, but we maybe lost an opportunity to change society with the emergency of COVID. This is our second chance that in trying to alleviate, fix, change direction on this, we are hopefully addressing the major fault lines with what's wrong anyway, that in fixing the battery of the car, we're realizing the engine is hammered as well. So, so hopefully this isn't that there are a number of parallels, and I know you probably don't want to draw too many because there are different scales and complexity, but it is, I'm glad you started there. It does give you that template. So in the first, we heard about the Citizens' Assembly, which is, people talking indoors, and it's, what's the word? It's nicely non-dramatic because they are working through detail. But episode 2 gets more dramatic because that is some effects of environmental issues, and it becomes very tangible, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. In the next clip, yeah, yeah. It does indeed. Um, yeah. So I think before we move on, if that's okay,
Yeah.
I'd just like to talk maybe a bit about the team
Oh yes, of course. Yeah.
who are involved in this project. Because there are about 15 of us involved altogether. So we've presenters, we've researchers. You can see a lot of them in the background there. Colm, we've writers, we've a communications
Yeah.
team, we've designers, and a sound engineer, and all just a really great bunch of people. And we had a meeting at the start of this where we kind of asked about what we wanted to achieve with this podcast. And one of the big things for me was that everyone involved would get a lot from it.
Yeah.
And everyone sort of has heard me say it, but anytime we've been meeting, whether it's meeting up with the writers or meeting up with the designers or even, the chat we had with you yesterday, it's always you always leave those meetings feeling good and feeling like part of something. And go on.
So I was going to say, with a large group of people, in some ways it's a microcosm of how to get, because within that group, people will have, well, I think we should cover this, or we should start with that. Is there, do you find that in some ways you're rehearsing bigger discussions by even prioritizing what you talk about in your 8 episodes?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that work with the writing team and the research team has been great. We had a lovely Zoom there during the week where I think we had an argument over one word, and in a really good way. I can't remember what it was, but it's really lovely. Yeah, it definitely helps you flesh the stuff out. But then also the fact that everyone's coming from different places. Everyone's coming from different sort of levels of experience with climate action, and that's lovely as well. And I know that we're talking about the new podcast, but I'm still in that sort of COVID and climate mindset. And one thing that I've really noticed is that, with COVID, when it struck at the very start of it, there was that early stage of people having this mad panic and being really selfish and hoarding toilet paper and panic buying. And then after a couple of weeks, once people realized, then that sense of solidarity really came out.
Yeah.
And I think with climate change, most people still haven't realized how bad it is. But for those people that do, that sense of solidarity is already there. And that really comes across in the team, in the podcast. Even the fact that, I just reached out to you and you were like, yeah, I'll do that. And the same with journalists we've reached out to that they're going to feature. And I think that's a really lovely thing. And it's a really lovely parallel that once people realize this climate stuff's really bad, then that sense of solidarity comes through. And that's really, a real positive, I think.
Yeah. And sure, what else would we be doing? Would we be doing only trying to fix the climate? Nothing else on.
Exactly. Yeah.
Once you turn 40, you start to look for meaning in your life anyway. So that's going to be my thing, because I'm as tall as I'm ever going to be. So I need some targets. So it sounds like a nice team. It sounds like a group of people who welcome their listeners as well and their inputs. Do you want to talk about episode 2 now? Is there anything else you'd like to say about your team?
I think just to say to the people watching and the people listening, if this sounds like something that you are supportive of, just to tell everyone about it, tune into episode 1, and especially if you're involved in organizations and groups, to send us your news, send us your events, and we'll do our best to cover them. But yeah, I think failing that, let's roll on. Let's roll on the next clip.
We'll have a local news roundup. So from all around the country.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So yeah. So
do you want to tell us what we're going to hear in this one?
Absolutely, yeah. So the next clip is, you're going to hear Anna Pringle, and that is it's a 4-part feature. So there's going to be a little bit in every episode for the first 4 weeks, and it's really looking at a sort of wide-angle lens of the bog slide that there was in Mean Bog last year. So over the course of 4 clips, we'll be looking at the bogs, the wind farms, and even Amazon, how they're involved with it. So this is part one of that.
This is a story in 4 parts about how a remote mountain bog slide exposes the links between wind energy and big data. On Friday the 13th of November 2020, a bog slide started in the hills near Barnesmore Gap in County Donegal. Word quickly spread that there was a problem at the Mean Bog wind farm. Slowly, over the weekend, the bog continued to move and community concerns grew. A video of the bog slide emerged. It's shot from a road built into the bog, and at first it's hard to comprehend it when you look at it. The bog is moving, sliding slowly down a gentle slope. Trees are moving with it. Tall Sitka spruce, sliding past. Upright, the roots too shallow to hold them in place. By Monday, the extent of the damage from the bog burst could be seen and felt miles from Mean Bog. The displaced peat carried across the border into Tyrone. The impact of the bog slide was devastating on the nearby Mournbeg River and its valuable fish stocks. The water in the river was pitch black, and the Castledurg water treatment plant had to be shut down. How do bog slides happen, and what does it have to do with climate action? Mean Bog was not the first bog slide in Ireland, or even the first one last year. In Leitrim, there was a bog slide down Shass Mountain that engulfed the unfortunately named Bridge of Hope. An investigator there described it as looking like a bomb crater after the bog burst. Rainfall patterns have been changing as Ireland warms. Some predictions say that we'll have warmer summers and wetter winters in future. Heavy rain appears to have been a factor in all the bog slides last year. For 6 weeks last spring, there were near drought conditions in the west, but then heavy rain fell on Shass Mountain before its bog burst in July. And Donegal's rainfall in November was 30% above normal. Drought can crack the bog, and then, followed by heavy rain, gets into the cracks, and that has a big impact. So rain was one factor, but all the bogs had forestry plantations nearby too. Only Mean Bog had a wind farm, but Ireland's most notorious bog slide was at Derrybryan Wind Farm in County Galway in 2003, triggered by wind farm construction. The European Commission brought Ireland to the European Court of Justice over that landslide, and the Irish government is still paying the fines that resulted. Wind farms need extensive networks of roads to put the turbines in place and to service them as they're operating. Forestry also needs roads, and Sitka spruce plantations on peatlands need drainage so the trees can grow. A combination of construction, planting and climate change can damage the stability of the bogs. Locals always knew that Mean Bog was unstable. They said it wasn't suitable for trees, never mind for wind construction. But the Irish government's 2019 Climate Action Plan has made expanding wind energy a national priority. To meet the emissions reduction targets, onshore wind would have to double by 2030 to about 8.2 gigawatts. The plan also sets a forestry priority, aiming to almost double the hectares per annum planted in forestry by 2030. And it wants to protect peatlands too, by re-wetting 40,000 hectares every year. Mean Bog is an example of a site where these 3 priorities appear to be mutually incompatible, raising questions about how Ireland will deliver on the ambitious targets in its climate action plan. But what has all this got to do with Amazon? What has a giant American company got to do with a wind farm in a bog in Donegal? We'll tell you about that next week.
Oh, hangers! You're already teasing your audience serial style, Dara. I like it. We'll be hearing a little bit from Anna later on, but as well as the contributors, you are collaborating as well too with some other groups and some groups I hadn't heard of.
Yeah. So once again, I think it's something that's quite easy to do because there are so many great environmentalists out there with interesting stories and a lot to say. So we have Irish Doctors for the Environment are going to be doing a feature for us every a few times over the 8 weeks, and they basically look at the concept of planetary health. So what the health of the planet has got to do with human health. So they'll be looking at things like the spread of tick-borne diseases. They'll be looking at things like climate anxiety. And we'll have a few different doctors talking us through those issues. And then we also have Cara Carney from the Book of Leaves podcast. And I'd say she's a climate podcasting stalwart. She's over 50 episodes done at this stage, where she goes around and interviews people from all walks of life, and asks them what they do for the environment, and looks for suggestions of leaves out of their book that we can all take. So she's doing little mini episodes for us throughout this series.
That's a great idea. And I like the way your podcast kind of, they don't compete, they mesh with each other in a nice way. And it seems like you set this up to fill in the interstices between any other things that are covering one thing. You know, that kind of collective feel is important. In some ways, it mirrors what we have to do on the ground, doesn't it?
For sure. And I think it also provides a very easy way for any broadcasters to improve their climate coverage. It's just get someone in, have them on your show every week. So it was a no-brainer for me, because there's just so much amazing expertise out there, and so many people that know so much. So to get them on to share what they know is a no-brainer.
Speaking of Cara Carney, am I right in saying we should be hearing a clip from her shortly, just to give Robert a chance to cue it up? So it's so, by the way, the people you heard Dara talk about, just to say them again: Irish Doctors for the Environment, and also Book of Leaves, which is Cara Carney. Cara, in episode 1, will be chatting to Colm Ennis, who provides tips on how to help nature in your garden. And I think I watched Colm build a pond recently online. That's the same Colm, isn't it? He's into he loves salamanders and newts, and sure, why wouldn't you? Some of our best animals. And so Cara is chatting to him, and I think we should be hearing that clip shortly.
Thank you, Dara. This week, I actually went back to a past interviewee of mine called Colm Ennis, who I interviewed in episode 15, and we chatted about bringing biodiversity back into your garden. So we're going to listen to his suggestion of something that we can all do, and this would have pretty immediate results in benefiting the local wildlife, from the smallest critters to the slightly bigger hedgehogs. You never know who might visit your garden if you take a leaf out of Colm's book. So I will let him introduce himself and give you his ideas.
Hi, my name is Colm Ennis, and I'm a research associate with the Trinity College Zoology Department and a science officer with the Herpetological Society of Ireland. And the 2 leaves I'd like to give you out of my personal book for looking after biodiversity and nature is, first and foremost, to leave a mess for nature. Nature loves a mess, and in these modern times we seem to be very obsessed with tidiness and cleanliness in our gardens and our public spaces. So whether you have a balcony on an apartment, or whether you're fortunate enough to have your own bit of garden or plot of land, or even if you have a shared community space, leave a small area wild, covered in branches and rocks and places for bugs to hide out, and leave that wild for nature. It will draw in animals almost immediately, and it's a wonderful way, and a very easy and effective way of bringing nature into these spaces. So leave a bit of a mess. Twigs, old wood, rocks, branches, pile them all up, leave them there. You don't have to invest in a very fancy bug hotel. You can just reuse natural occurring material like what I just listed there, and just pile it up and watch nature arrive. My second leaf that I'd like to suggest to people is build a pond. Now, a pond doesn't have to be an epic lake in a Georgian mansion. A pond can be a plastic tub from one of your hardware stores. sink it in the ground or leave it upraised and build it up around it with rocks and branches and plants so that animals can get in now. But anything that holds standing water anywhere, even if it's in a built up city, something will arrive and use it, whether it be invertebrates like mosquitoes. They're not all bad, they feed bats. And they don't really bite us in Ireland, but so they're a great little thing that will arrive. Midges, hoverfly larvae will arrive. I guarantee you those species of animals will arrive. If you're very fortunate, you'll get frogs and newts, maybe dragonflies. It's a wonderful, wonderful way of encouraging nature and giving nature a space. If you combine that with leaving a mess for nature, so that pile of rubble I talked about earlier on, natural rubble, with a small pond beside it and maybe even some native wildflowers, or just don't mow your lawn around that area, few meters squared, that combination will be essential for the local wildlife in your area. So there's my 2 leaves to take from my book, and best of luck with them.
Now, so they are some simple but really effective suggestions from Collie. If you want to hear some more and more about his story, how he became as big into biodiversity and critters as he is, you can listen to the episode that I recorded with him in his critter shed for episode 15 of Book of Leaves. He also has his own podcast called Critter Shed, which I would definitely recommend checking out. It's very educational, and you learn a lot about the critters that we have in Ireland. So this is our suggestions for this episode.
Very good. Now, so do not adjust your screen. We are all supposed to be there. This is a panel now, and I'm going to introduce them all very soon. But thanks very much to Collie there, and definitely a lot of love for newts in the stream there. I mean the live stream, not an actual stream. As Brian Byrne says, love a good mess, and Adam Boland says, love a good newt myself, Colm. So I don't want to speak for the Climate Alarm Clock podcast, but I hope that even though there will be some bad news from time to time, it will always be good newts. It will be a good newts podcast. So now we, and I don't know whether there'll be any more newt related puns. I can't really speak for myself. We are going to have a little Q&A now with some of the people involved. And if you have any questions, please do. And yes, Deirdre, I heard that audio feedback as well too. I thought that's Deirdre or Carol there. That's just a little bit of because it was going so well so far. We thought we'd throw a little wobble in just to show that we need to be able to react and think on our feet. There was a little bit of feedback there, but that's the weather. Heavy showers. So we've got our panel, and we're going to chat to them. If you have any questions, please do put them in the comments on Facebook or on Twitter or on YouTube. Even if we don't get to them here, the questions aren't wasted, because we will address them, I'm sure, or they will address them in perhaps in episodes themselves. So we have on screen lining around the place, so you should be seeing Dara, who you're familiar with, Anna Pringle, whose voice you heard there earlier, Anna Bogwoman, helpfully she's labelled herself Anna Bogwoman, Ciara Daly, who's part of social media and comms there, Robert Cotter, sound engineer, who I must compliment on very smooth cueing, who's all the clips have all appeared very nicely. So that's the level. That's the kind of tech you can expect with your Climate Alarm Clock helpings. Cara Carney, you've heard her voice already. Book of Leaves. Sive Lee from the Irish Doctors for the Environment, and is Rachel there? I don't think Rachel is there, but no. And neither is Colin. But anyway, that's enough for now. If I'm going to just have a quick chat with all of them. Anna, first of all, there was a cliffhanger there, or whatever a cliff is in a bog slip, a low level hummock. What can we expect from parts 2, 3, and 4 without giving away all of your juicy spoilers? Because obviously you want, you're going to sell the whole thing to sponsors. I'm joking. But what can we expect?
Well, thanks, Colm, and thanks for doing this tonight. Well, we really felt that Mean Bog is an interesting story. I mean, I'm biased because I'm from the bog. I'm from the hills of Donegal. But we felt it was an interesting story because it shows how a number of different priorities came together. Wind energy, forestry, peatlands, and it didn't necessarily work. So that's kind of why we're exploring that a little bit. So in the next few weeks, we'll be looking at how that's all playing out and what it means for our climate action plan. So in part 2, we will reveal the link between the bog and data centres, but you will have to tune in to find out more about that.
Data centers, I feel like there should be some sort of ding, ding, ding music appearing, whereas before I thought they were, they're amazing. Anyway, that's what this is about. We appreciate, as life goes on, more and more complexity, but it's key not to be afraid of the complexity of interlocking concerns, be they wind farms, which are good in many reasons, the wrong type of tree or the right type of tree, and just leaving it the hell alone. It's hard to deal with that complexity, but that's probably the biggest challenge for everybody, isn't it? Look, it's never simple. Don't be afraid of difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's also some points where the connections are causing challenges as well. Like if we look at our economic policy compared to our climate policy, and you look at putting forestry on a bog, for example, there's just a lot of things to tease out there that we need to unravel.
Yeah, very good. So you're also going to be in the weekly news part of the show, where you discuss the week's climate stories. I mean, I know you have to tell it like it is, but presumably you will. There will be times where you're going, oh man, that's 4 sad stories in a row. What do I do?
Yeah, well, we are kind of committed to making sure we have at least some positive news. And the good news is that there is more news now about climate issues, and we are starting to see some progress. So we'll definitely be highlighting that without shying away from the tough news as well. But mainly, we gather on a Thursday morning and fight about which stories are the best ones that we need to be covering, and eat a lot of cakes. It's definitely not... I don't know if that's good for the climate or bad for the climate. We've definitely been eating a lot of calories, though, as we've been working through this on a Thursday morning. So, but we'll be looking at that, and I'll also be looking at a not climate story every week. So we'll find a story that maybe should have had a climate angle but didn't, and we'll sort of explore that as well.
Brilliant. I want to be in that climate alarm clock newsroom where you're all just, ceiling fan going. Everybody's got a pencil behind their ear, a cork board with threads connecting. That's investigative journalism. I want to see that when you're all allowed back into the room. Thanks very much, Anna, and well done on episode 1. Really looking forward to the rest. Cara, Dara described your podcast. Your feature will be kind of mini episodes of the Book of Leaves podcast, and I think we spoke last year in a Clean Coast context, so I did download a few episodes. I loved the hope in it, and trying to get, like, in a giant problem, trying to find ways to do stuff. Why did you start it? And then I suppose, did it lead then to this project, make it easier to get involved in this project?
Yeah, definitely. Before I started this, I don't think I would have seen myself collaborating with the team of 15 on climate news, because I would have felt grossly underqualified. Because I'm not, like, I call myself a jack of all trades, master of none. Like, when I did arts in college, so I learned how to do cartwheels and stuff, and then you come out and you're like, climate change is a thing. So I started Book of Leaves because I was a big fan of podcasts and was listening to another one where I just loved the interviewer, his style of finding out people's story, and he was just interviewing someone who made coconut bowls. And I was like, God, wouldn't it be great if there was a podcast in Ireland where people who had come up with ideas or were doing things that were good for the planet just had like a little platform to share it on? And I was like, why don't I do it? So I thought of the name and the logo and really just was like, okay, just give it a go. And I really like, this is in April 2019, I think, and I just love like finding everyday people, because there's so many panels and podcasts and other places where it's always experts on climate policy or something being involved, but there's so many like everyday people, parents, or just normal activists juggling their normal job with their normal activist life that are doing amazing things. And I just love learning their stories. So I do it because I love it. But yeah, it definitely made then when I found the COVID alarm clock, and then just from sharing my love of that, and Dara then reached out and told me about this, I absolutely was like, yeah, definitely, because any chance to kind of spread any kind of solutions and share
Mm.
more about what people are doing is a good one.
And story is important, isn't it? Like, we need facts and we need information, but when it's wrapped up in a story with people who we can identify with, and we are the same as half of them, or they're a bit like us in some ways, then it kind of makes it less lonely when you want to try something yourself, doesn't it, if you know somebody else's story.
Yeah, definitely. Like talked about this actually with Gary Tyrrell from the Climate Ambassador program in this week's episode, but like how to communicate the climate crisis and using people's personal stories is so important. So I love asking people about like what triggered their eco consciousness, or like what examples they have of the ripple effect, because I think people can often get bogged down and feel hopeless because it's such a huge problem, and you forget the power that you have as an individual. And I just love hearing people have so many stories about them doing one small thing. It might be small,
Mm.
but like the effect that that then has, where there's a friend of mine who went to college, and their default meal they were serving in the canteen was meat, and you had to have a diet card if you wanted veggie. And he went in and he was like, well, can we have the default veggie and you need a diet card for meat if you want the meat dishes? And they accepted it and they changed it. And I was like, that story, that's like so cool. And like if you could do
Mm.
that in like colleges, imagine the difference you could make. So absolutely, I think stories are so powerful, and you need to hear them from a diverse group of people from all walks of life, all ages, all forms, no matter what your income is, your religion is, your any kind of orientation. Like there's so many different groups that I think we don't hear from enough when it comes to solutions. So, and I just love talking, clearly.
That's fine. That's an asset in this game. Thanks very much, Cara. Sive, can you give us an idea of Irish Doctors for the Environment, who they are?
Yeah, sure. So Irish Doctors for the Environment, we started in 2018 as a group of junior doctors at that stage. But now we've kind of expanded to we have doctors from all levels of training. We have medical students, and we also have some allied health professionals like nurses, physios, dietitians on board. So basically anyone who has an interest in the interplay between the planet and human health is more than welcome to get involved. And our sort of overarching guide and what we want to do is that we aim to improve human health by improving the health of the planet.
Very good. That's a simple, complicated to do it, but simple equation, and it's memorable as well. And I think it's a great example of how this is not niche. Like there's so many reasons to care about this from all sorts of angles. And it's interesting, just in a similar vein, at a recent Teagasc Expo, they had a big climate thing, big billboards with information. And the most powerful thing, I was talking to a farmer who was at it, is that they're saying at it, this stuff is already affecting you. It's not like something that's coming down the line, and if you jump before anyone else, you're a mug, and Brazil will get in ahead. You know what I mean? Like it's not a kind of a market thing. It's no. Do you remember that drought? Do you remember that heavy rain where you couldn't cut silage? It's affecting, and it's so hearing you talk about doctors coming at it from this angle, we care about health. Oh, and guess what? This stuff is being, your health's being affected. It's a really good angle, isn't it? It's saying it really says stakeholder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like that, certainly when we started out, a lot of feedback we would get was like, oh, yeah, it's causing drought, but it's not affecting us here in Ireland. And what we always try to emphasize is, well, actually it is. And okay, we might not have sort of these massive climate emergency type events, but we do have air pollution here. We're seeing wetter summers, warmer temperatures, so it's all these kind of knock-on effects, and really bringing it home that it affects everybody all around the world.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. Oh, just in your features, what kind of things do you have planned?
Yeah, so because we sort of really as well believe that planetary health or climate change affects all areas of human health, so we're going to be looking at a kind of vast array of topics, from how climate change affected the COVID-19 crisis to the effects on mental health, things like climate anxiety. We'll be looking at air quality, sustainable transport, active transport. I myself am going to be talking about the links with sexual and reproductive health, because that's what I specialize in. So there's going to be a big variety of different topics involved.
Great. Sounds good. Really something to look forward to. Thanks very much. Some other people I just want to chat to is the team working away they're in the background, so you'll never see them again. No, I'm joking. After this launch, I'm going to talk to Robert and Kira next. First of all, Robert, who is the sound engineer putting it all together.
Hello.
And you've already inspired huge confidence with the smoothness of this. So
yeah, sorry about that feedback.
That's all right. Apparently Cara owned up to that. We had a witch hunt in the background, and she owned up to it.
That was my fault, guys. It's great that two people in the team have taken the hit for me. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Dara.
I'm not responsible for Dara's sound. Sorry.
That's all right. Robert, it's I always like talking to people at, when there's an overriding theme and then you meet somebody at it, particularly sound engineer, because I do a lot of gigs. So I'll be a sound engineer at an equality gig, or a sound engineer at environmental thing, or a sound engineer at the ploughing championships. And obviously, so your job is to get the thing out there, but washing over you is all of this stuff. Is this something you were in anyway, like an environmentalist turned sound engineer, or are you now were you like a coal baron who also did sound engineering and has now been converted?
I've been converted. Yes, I guess I've always been, I've just been worried about the whole climate emergency and really kind of wondering what I can actually do. I think there's a big part of it is like, what can one man really do? So I just I'm good at sound engineering, professional. And I thought, when Dara, me and Dara are old friends, so when he said he was doing a podcast, I was like, let me help, because I can help. And this is something that I can do. I make a lot of trashy television, and it's a bit of fun, but it drives me up the wall how rubbish it is. And actually they don't talk about climate change, not nearly enough. And sometimes I'm like, literally, luckily I'm in my own little room and I'm shouting, but no one else hears me. So it feels good to do something that might actually help or change some minds. And
Brilliant. I was looking up on LinkedIn now to find out the trashy.
Television. Yeah.
So what, prime time? What do you do? That's prime time. Anyway.
Yeah, prime time, bit of daytime as well.
Great stuff. And I think in terms of, we'll have a check to see if there are any questions in the chat. But Kira, on communications and social media channels, is this you do communications and now you put an environmental filter on your work and then you do it that way, or is this coming from a deep place?
For me, it is, I work in communications, but not like anything around climate change or the climate crisis. So for me, it's similar to Rob. Probably more recently even is when the consciousness around it has developed. So probably during the pandemic, kind of two things became pretty clear to me. The first was that maybe, although the phrase "we're all in together" is generally pretty well intentioned, it doesn't really help those that are at risk and the most vulnerable. That's really clear when we see now the West are celebrating coming out of COVID, while there's countries all over the world who are very much still in the midst of it, and those countries happen to be the most kind of poorer nations. So The second, I guess, for me was the realization of how big a role what I do, like communications can play. Like we saw during COVID, how clear communication from our leaders really drove a change in the way we do things here in Ireland. We saw the way that people got behind wearing masks, social distancing, all of these what were once really bizarre concepts. We started to accept them as normal day-to-day parts of our lives. So the way that people got on board with them is down to, I guess, the reasons why changes needed to be made. Those reasons were being kind of communicated clearly, and they were helping people to understand what those consequences might be if they didn't get on board. And so, I guess over the last year and a half, through listening to projects like the COVID alarm clock, which came before this project, it was something that I learned was kind of missing from the communications around the climate crisis here in Ireland and the way that it is going to affect us and other countries around the world. So for me, that was kind of the push to try and get involved in trying to call for a change. I mean, like 2 or 3 years ago, I really knew nothing about this topic. I knew how to recycle. I didn't always do it. That's just genuinely where I was at, because it was something that just was honestly not high on my list of priorities. I didn't know how I would make a change, and the thought of like the topic just got me so overwhelmed. But when we were in lockdown, I was forced to slow down and I had to pay attention to what was going on around me. And that was when I kind of started learning a little bit more about the climate crisis. It wasn't necessarily that I obviously didn't care about it in the lead up to the pandemic. It was just more up until that point, I was really overwhelmed by where to start. And so listening to the COVID alarm clock, that was just a really good launch spot for me to start learning about the climate crisis, but in a way that I felt positive and empowered to do something about it, even if it was just to educate myself about it a little more. And even coming into the project, like even with all this, I was still really cautious and nervous and actually committing. But once I like Rob, I'm a friend of Dara. So out of politeness, I said, yes, okay, I'll help. And when I got on the call and I met the team and I saw how knowledgeable they all were, but at the same time really welcoming and like not judgmental, which in my mind is what I expected from people like this. No offense to anybody, but that is what I had built up. Once I met all of those people, I just kind of knew, all right, this is something I want to get involved with. And this is something that I could really see being something that will actually inspire other people or move other people to actually kind of just take that action and dip the toe and start learning more about it. In short, that's my answer.
Yeah, no, there's so many, you covered so many essential, like in some ways you preempt a lot of what other people might be thinking, in that how do I reconcile the giantness of the topic with what I can do? I think both of you, it reminded me of, there's a woman called Dr. Ayanna Presley, I think she is. She's an oceanographer. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. And she has a brilliant Venn diagram that I'll gladly copy and tell everybody about, which is basically, 3 circles. What do I enjoy doing? What needs to be done? What am I good at? And where those intersect is what you should do to have the best hope of, I mean, it's not the only thing you can do, but to have the best hope of not despairing or feeling pointlessness or whatever. And the thing is, everybody's got that segment in the middle, that three intersection Venn diagram. Everybody's got a different one. And it's always surprising what people's skills are. So that's brilliant. In some ways you preempt it just lead nicely into one of the questions on the chat from Niall Carmody. What would the panel say to people who are reluctant to inform themselves about the climate crisis for fear of bringing on eco-anxiety? Knowledge is power, but climate knowledge is heavy. That's really good. And we've one other so far. What we might do is get maybe half of you to talk to or just a couple of you, or maybe Dara, do you want to lead off with an answer to that one? And then there's one on the Irish focus as well too. So if anybody wants to take that. Is that you?
Sure. I think in terms of the, can you hear me there?
Oh, very much so.
Okay, yeah, there's a bit of a delay, I think, but I think in terms of climate anxiety, first of all, to say Irish Doctors for Environment are going to be talking about that. And one thing about eco anxiety is, just to say from the off, that it's a really rational response, that it's a totally normal response to a very real threat. And the knowledge is definitely heavy, but the best thing to do, if possible, to deal with eco anxiety is to sort of sit with it, accept it, and then to deal with it by taking action. So we're going to, hopefully in the podcast, in every episode, have ideas of actions that people can take. So we're really trying to not just be like, here's all the really bad news. We're going to say, here's the bad news, but here's some good stuff, and here's some action that you can take. And in general, the ways to deal with eco anxiety are taking action and being part of a group. So, maybe get involved with us, or find your local environmental group and get involved with them. They are the best ways of dealing with it.
Very good. Did you have your hand up there, Cara?
Kind of. I was like, do I put my hand up in this situation? Don't know. But I would like to add to, I guess, a response to Niall's question, that I think there's so many people in my life who, no matter how obvious of an environmentalist I am and how much I care about this, they just don't have the interest, and be that they're reluctant to inform themselves because of eco anxiety, or because the climate change, they can't afford to worry about it because either money is a huge issue, or there's all these other factors in their life, or they just don't have the capacity to or really choose not to feel maybe saddened by it. I think I try focus on the fact that we only need a small number of the population to be active in, be that like protests and actions, or as Extinction Rebellion talk about, is civil disobedience. There's a person called Erica Chenoweth who did studies about what it takes for social change, societal change to happen, and it's like 3.5% of the population is all that's required to consistently engage to get the kind of the government and the corporations that are actually responsible to change. So when I see the people around me and I'm like, why don't they care? Why aren't they listening? Or why don't, because I do get eco anxiety, but I'd rather the knowledge. And some people I don't think are going to change, perhaps until it's too late, but we don't need everyone. We just need as many as we can. And then to refocus on like the governments and politicians. I think that's what helps me anyway.
Great stuff. Just Dara, do you want to take to start on Sarah's question about she's saying, I love the Irish focus because I think we need this crisis to be understood as real and current, but interested to hear if you'll have contributors from other countries or indeed discussing climate justice.
So we are very much figuring this all out as we go along. So I suppose our big focus at the moment in terms of the international dimension is COP is coming up. COP26 is coming up in Glasgow, and we will definitely be looking at that with an international dimension, talking to some sort of experts around that, and hopefully speaking to people who are over at COP. In terms of contributors from other countries, as I say, this is sort of 8 weeks where we're figuring it out as we go along. And if we get an opportunity to talk to people from other countries, we will. If not, then at the end of our 8 weeks, we might reflect. And when season 2 comes out, we might have the International Climate News feature every week as well.
Very good. Already planning seasons ahead. Excellent. We have 2 other questions. And I was conscious that it's just gone 8 o'clock. Will we take those two and leave it at that? If that's all right. So just 1840. Excited to hear about energy topics in the context of Irish government seeking 2 gigawatts of new fossil fuel plant by 2030. Will you be talking about alternatives to gas to support renewables?
So we will be having a fairly eminent expert on next week on the whole energy supply crisis. I haven't asked him if we can name drop, so I'm not going to do it, but we will be looking at that sort of big picture issue next week in our current news bit. And we'll be taking it from there. Yeah.
Brilliant. And then for anybody who wants to jump in on this, Elaine saying, I sometimes feel that people, i.e. my parents, take it as a personal attack when you talk about the climate. How would you recommend talking to the older generation? We have a young person there who wants to take that on. You're muted there, are you? Sorry.
I'm pretty young. Sorry, Anna, you go.
Sorry, I was going to say, as a representative of the parents' generation, I might take that one on. Yeah, I mean, I think we make too much of the intergenerational conflict on this personally. And it's fine. You can blame your parents for everything. That's perfectly fine. But I think for the most part, you'll find that people are open to listening. They're open to learning. My own mother said to me today when she heard about the podcast, she said, "Can you explain about hydrogen? Because I don't understand that. Can you do an explainer on that? So Dara, can we put that on our list?" So I think you'll find that people have questions and they're open to conversation, and we all need to be open to having those conversations. So that's the old person's view in the room.
Could I mention something as well too? It's that the words fly around like hydrogen, or like the buzzwords fly around. So they're zipping through the air and they're coming in through Liveline, Clareburn, wherever the radio station is glued to, whatever. And in some ways it's almost to listen to what they're hearing to understand where they're coming from. And this isn't like in a Fox News extremism at all. It's more, what or indeed anybody in your life that you're having trouble getting through to, before we say anything, to spend time sitting next to them as they digest the way they're getting the information. And then that helps, where it's like, so instead of saying, polar bears are extinct. Well, I heard on Joe Duffy that some of those polar bears are drawing the dole and working, so to find out what they're hearing, so then you can counter with, well, they didn't actually ask anybody and interview any polar bears for that show, so, and then they go, you're right, actually, they didn't. Now, this is obviously simplistic, but sometimes we want to fix people, and maybe even just finding out what they're hearing, where they're hearing it, and how it's framed, what I mean, might help. It's not the only way. That's just something I've found. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, I mean, when people take it as a personal attack, we also have to remember that for older generations, we've had decades of misinformation being spun by fossil fuel companies. So people didn't know, and decades of consumption being driven and so on. So we have to kind of take that into account as well, that it's easy to point the finger and say, how did we let this happen? But we didn't know. And part of what we're about is helping people know.
And as a 43-year-old, I knew about climate change 30 years ago, but then it went away for a while, because it was a very, very clever PR campaign deliberately designed to say, well, we don't know, and we all, like, wasn't my parents that dropped the ball either. It was me in my 20s and 30s, so there's definitely, so as you say, yes, there's a huge infrastructure that we're fighting here, infrastructure of information. I don't know, I guess we should probably, Dara, do you want to wrap it up? Unless anyone else has any comments about where we can hear it next, and all of that. If there's anything you want to add in?
Just Peter there is offering a lift to the COP 26. if anyone wants
Oh,
to
brilliant.
go. I'm busy, Peter, but yeah, that's a lovely offer. Thanks very much.
I wonder what his
and
route
just to
is.
say
Where
thanks
is
a
he
million.
going via?
Thanks a million to everyone for tuning in. Thanks for the questions. A huge thanks to all of the team that have been involved in putting episode 1 together so far. It will be out on Friday at 11, available wherever you get your podcasts. Please do reach out to us if you have any news. Tell your friends about it. And just, thanks a million, Colm, as well, for coming along and hosting for us tonight.
No probs. Sure, what else would I be doing? I have a stand-up show called Climate Worrier coming up at some point. Won't sully this by telling where you can buy tickets, right?
Oh,
I
dude,
can't even
go on,
remember.
tell us. Go on.
I can't remember. Keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for me on Twitter.
He might be on one of those shows you hate, Rob.
Yeah.
Oh no, I don't hate them. They pay my rent. Just it's good if someone comes on and talks about climate change. I absolutely love them. So occasionally does happen. Yeah.
So I guess we're done. Everybody, go do your normal Wednesday things. Check out the podcast. Thanks for listening and sharing and commenting. And for me, best of luck to the team. Delighted that you asked me along, and I wish you the very best.
Brilliant.
See you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye bye.